Ladies and gentlemen, thank you immensely for joining us on the fresh dose of Talking Points over your number one Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. But today, in the course of this first edition for the month of April 2024, we shall be looking at the just ended or recently ended Senegalese elections that took place in the West African country. Indeed, Senegal's president-elect Bassirou Diomaye Faye will be sworn in just a few hours from now, exactly on Tuesday, after winning Senegal's presidential election. On the wave of change has a lot of challenges ahead as expectations are high. He becomes the country's fifth and youngest president after his main challenger, Amadouba, conceded defeat following the March 24 first-round vote in recent presidential elections, which the outgoing leader, Macky Sall, terms the victory of Senegal's democracy. Positions as a beacon of change, Diomaye, who has promised to reshape Senegal's political landscape. The central to his agenda is revamping democratic institutions and tackling corruption. He also plans to renegotiate international contracts, potentially introducing a new currency. So in the course of today's edition, according to President-elect Diomaye Faye, the very foundation of his political project is the rehabilitation of the institutions of the Republic and the restoration of the state based on the rule of law. Let's recall that after his win, he met with his predecessor, the outgoing president, His Excellency Macky Sall, to discuss issues pertaining to the state. He affirmed during his address that President Sall's vigilance and commitment had guaranteed a free, democratic, and transparent vote. However, challenges loom, including high expectations from citizens. As Faye prepares to assume office on Tuesday, we shall be analyzing in the course of today's edition of Talking Point what awaits this new president. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point. Stay with us. If you're just tuning in, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, this is Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. You're watching us live on For You Television, listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3, meanwhile we're streaming on all different social media platforms. So today we're discussing West Africa with the recently ended Senegal presidential elections, and in the course of today's edition, we shall be trying to understand what awaits the new president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye. So, as a panel this afternoon, we're joined by Prince Musika Keng, who is a Pan-Africanist. He's joined us all the way here from Cameroon. Greetings to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to be on this platform, and I look forward to having a wonderful exchange with all our compatriots out there and all our listeners and viewers out there for this wonderful talking point and for the wonderful exchange.
Exactly, it shall be a wonderful exchange as we shall be, moving out our parcours all through Senegal to understand what's happening there in the West African country. Like we mentioned in our preamble, Diomaye Faye is the fifth and the youngest president of the West African country. We're equally joined by OPEOLUWA TAIWO, who is the executive director of Africa Bridge Initiative. Join us all the way from Lagos in Nigeria. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you for having me. God bless Nigeria.
It's always a pleasure to have you on board. So we proceed without wasting too much of your time. We shall dive right into analysis. I'll kickstart this first question with you, Mr. MUSI. So what is your appraisal, first of all, of the recently ended Senegal presidential elections?
Well, I want to say Faye's win for Senegalese people. It's a win for Africa. It's a win for democracy. It's a win for Pan-Africanism, and It's a way to prove to the world that the younger generation are taking over, the younger generation are in a leadership position. And it's a win to tell the world that there is a revolution. It's a revolution taking place in Africa. I must attest here that it is important to acknowledge the fact that collaboration is one of the key aspects that I want to highlight in Africa's democracy. Secondly, I want to also highlight the fact that the youth, as it was said 20, 30 years ago, are the leaders of tomorrow. I want to say that trust, I want to say that democracy, I want to say that growing together and living together, generational thoughts are a prerequisite for development. It's a prerequisite for a stable economy. It's a prerequisite for countries that want to emerge. Faye's defeat during these last presidential elections does not only show us that we need to be popular to be in leadership position, it shows us that it is important to highlight the fact that within a democratic system, people need to follow the voice of their people. I'm talking about their citizens. And the voice of the citizen is always a leading voice. Africa over generations, Africa over the years have had this kind of pre-colonialism where the voice of the people was never heard. It was about democracy. But democracy, in my personal observation and point of view, is not the only form of government. It is just one form of government. But I think the voice of the people still stands in terms of what the people want, what the leaders tell them that they will offer them if they are given leadership position. Faye's defeat to me is just like my grandmother usually tells me that to have a pot with cooked food covered, you really never knows its contents until you open the pot before you can see the content or what was cooking on the fireside. So now a pot of food that has been cooking, and we are at the verge of seeing what was in that pot. And he needs to prove to his compatriots, he needs to prove to his electorates what he stands for and what he stands to offer to Africa. And I want to be very particular here in saying that whenever a people votes you in power, you must be able at every stage of the way to execute not only your promises to the people, but the will of the people. And I think Faye's coming to leadership is based on the trust that he had with his compatriots. And now is the time that we want to see. And it's just a trying moment again for Africa because we are not very sure if taking power within just a couple of days gives him the right place to be able to stand. But I also want to appreciate, first, his bilingualism. Two, I want to appreciate his campaigns. I want to appreciate his team. And I want to appreciate his ideologies. We will be able to kind of have a breakdown of what his ideology stands for the benefit of Africa. Thank you.
Exactly. We shall be unfolding that in the course of this edition. Thank you, Mansley, for that brilliant preamble. Now, over to you, Mr. OPEOLUWA. Now you've listened to your co-panelists. And now your opinion, how did you appraise the just ended presidential elections in Senegal?
All right, thank you for having me. The Senegalese election for year 2024, like my co-panelist said, is going to be a new order for Africa. It's going to be a paradigm shift for Africa. It's going to be a new wave of political dispensation, a new wave of acclimatizing into the sustainability of 21st century democracy. Now, one thing we must understand clearly at this junction is that this is a new wave. It's like a wind blowing away from the old order into the new order. The old order was talking about already 80 years, 90 years, and they are still coming for third term, fourth term, and fifth term. Even some of them have to die in office. Those are the old order. Even recently, we have some of them where we have the system called the sit-tight syndrome, whereby even when the opposition win an incumbent, the incumbent will refuse to leave office. But for Faye's victory, a 44-year-old man from Senegal, giving a paradigm shift to the development of democracy in Africa is a win-win for both the old order and the new order. So why is it a win-win transaction as African leaders and African analysts? We must understand first and foremost that politics is a game of number, and politics is not a game of sentiment. Politics is not a game of emotion. Politics is a game of life. When we talk about game of life, we are talking about the Constitution. We are talking about the laws that govern the affairs of the nation. Look at the as at 2001, having the Constitution for the country. We can see that we've been having the old order all this while. But for a man who was just released from the prison, just less than 2 weeks to the election, having the capacity and the capability to acclimatize himself to the entire citizen of that nation, having to get more than 54% of the Saturday general election. I want to say congratulations to an average citizen of Senegal. I want to say congratulations to the new order in Africa. I want to say congratulations to an average Democrat in Africa, because we are looking at Africa working out of military order. We are looking at Africa working with sustainability. We are looking at Africa having what we call intergenerational order, intergenerational economic integration. And this, I believe, Faye will bring on board. But like my co-panelists have said, we are not supposed to be rejoicing at this moment. We are only happy, but we are not expected to be rejoicing, because the unfolding of his manifesto, the unfolding of his agenda will determine how sustainable the capacity of his tenure will be for Senegalese, and also for, I believe, Faye will prove that truly is a Democrat who is young, vibrant, and able to give a new order in the democratic dispensation of Africa.
Exactly. It's worth noting that For You Media was on the ground during the presidential elections, and we could attest to the democracy, or say democratic elections in that part of the African continent. Now, in a bit to unfold with you, Mr. MUSI, now you cited that we can't really tell what, say, the manifesto of this president-elect actually carries, as all the time would tell. But with the ascension of Bassirou Diomaye Faye to power as the new president of the West African country, a nation that was seen through the during the reign of his predecessor, we're talking of Macky Sall, as a nation that stood as Africa's stable democracy. Now, the new president says he intends to, say, reinforce democratic institutions, fight corruption, amongst others, while implementing a monetary reform. Now, what are some of the challenges that this new president will face on the ground?
First and foremost, I must say, Faye taking over from Macky, it's first a proof of Senegal's democracy. Senegal has in Africa, one of the strongest democracies, and Ghana. But I must say that Senegal's democracy should not be taken for granted. It shouldn't be taken. Faye, like my co-panelist said, came out of prison just 2 weeks, and he's at the Unity Palace. He's at the presidency. And being at the presidency does not only mean that, he has the capabilities, but it's because the institutions that Senegal has, democratic institutions, in terms of the will of the people, because democracy has its own prowesses. But having this kind of democracy that I see in Senegal, where you are voted into office, I must say, Africa has had this wind of change. You can look at the situation, the situation that's going on in our Sahel region, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and Mali, Burkina Faso, uh, uh, and Burkina Faso and Niger. If you look at all what is going on in this Sahel region, which Senegal is a subsidy of that region, you will understand that Senegal's democracy, what happened in Senegal, Macky Sall, that irrespective of him being in power, there is still the will of the people. And this is the same thing. Faye might have come to power using democracy. I say democracy in quotes. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, their leaders came into power using, military coup. But now let's look at specificities. If you look at the way Faye started his regime, I said earlier that Faye is a very bilingual guy, which means that he has the capabilities to cut across Africa. He has a capability, which means that Africa being a bilingual continent across both cultural backgrounds. That is a plus for him. And I appreciate the fact that when he did his opening speech as the president of Senegal, he spoke in clean, beautiful, and succulent English. And I also want to highlight the fact that he haven't come into power using democracy. This was an instrument of staying in power that was imposed on us Africans by our colonial masters. Democracy in its rightful sense is not being practiced in Africa in its real terms of what democracy is in the Western world. Coming to power is a test of his ability, not only as a young man at his early age of 44, amongst the youngest presidents to exist in this continent, Africa. He is being tested of his integrity, his truthfulness, his love, and his peculiarity to issues of the interest of his people. And why I say so is because a young man like him came into power, was born, let me use the word, he was born when some of the leaders in Africa were already in power. I'm talking about a case like the president of my own country, President Paul Biya, who has been in power for plus 40-something years. So in effect, I'm saying that 5 years coming to power, he has existed to his adolescent, and now he's a man in adulthood with leaders still in power. So his coming to power is a true test of Africa's democracy, which was a system that was imposed on us by the Westerners. So he needs to prove beyond reasonable doubt that military coups in Africa, which is the ongoing normal in most of the countries in Africa, is different from a democratic rule, because he came into power as democracy, and now we're talking about military coup. But again, I'm a little bit worried about the fact that when Faye came into power, his first speech that he made was making sure, which was a foreign policy, making sure that he brings back Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso into the ECOWAS. Little to say, these are countries that has gone through democracy, and now they formed of government and wanted to take over power and go with military coups. And the will of the people, if you see in those three Sahel countries, the will of their people was well proven by the fact that the populations, the citizens of those nations rallied their forces behind their leaders to be able to give them the necessary support that they deserve. So I'm asking myself, if Faye's primary objective is to bring back these segregated African countries back into the ECOWAS, is he going to spend so much energy to bring in a people that they have already decided their path? They have already decided in having a new currency. They have already decided in having a form of government. They have already decided in having innovation technologies, innovation strategies to bring back economies. They have already decided in bringing in Western cultures and Western security services to protect the interests of their nations? Is he going to spend his time for leaders of these Sahel regions that have spent plus 1, 2 years or 6 months in power to do it and to run his mandate trying to bring them in? So yes, I'm trying to say here that this is a young man who is coming to concentrate in his domestic policies and making sure the people who voted him into power, who are his citizens, regain what they expected from him, which are local policies, national policies that are to the interest of their people, like what is being done in Burkina Faso by Tuareg, to make sure that the economy booms, the people have good negotiation deals with their foreign countries, and he is now rather now at this beginning trying to emphasize or rely his energy on foreign policy. So I'm trying to be a little bit careful here on this panel to make sure that Senegal does not only go back to use the rule of democracy, which is a long forgotten rule in Africa, to rely on renegotiating people to. I think I'll come back again to talk about why there are different regional blocs in Africa instead of talking about African Union. So Faye has to be very, very sensitive in dealing with issues of his electorates than issues of foreign policies of other people in other nations. Thank you.
It's all about the growth of Senegal. Now over to you, Mr. OPEOLUWA. Now you listen to your co-panelists with regards to the challenges that await the president-elect of Senegal. Earlier on, you cited and congratulated the president-elect Diomaye Faye. You said a win for him is a win for the average person in the West African country. Now, in line back with what your co-panelists said, in your opinion, what are some of the challenges that await this new president?
For the president-elect Diomaye Faye, yes, it's a win-win democratic process for him, for an average youth in Nigeria, in Africa, in West Africa. As of 2001, we've seen that up to now, only one man has been able to spend up to 7 years as the president of Senegal. Because according to the constitution of Senegal, years and for 2 terms. So that means Faye will still be in power for the next 5 years. Now, what is the way forward? There are 2 things that must be posited to the president-elect. 2 things for him to avoid, 2 things for him to embrace as a younger, vibrant president-elect of the people of Senegal. 2 things for him to avoid. Number 1, he must be very careful and be very diplomatic enough to guard the sovereignty of Senegal against any military interventions. He must be able to galvanize the entire military apparatus of Senegal for them to have true and full-fledged confidence in his capacity to deliver the dividends of democracy. He must also understand that apart from the sovereignty of the nation, he must also be aware and be careful on the virus that is called corruption in Africa. It is very easy for a sitting president or for a new president in Africa, so to say, to come up and say that I'm ready to fight corruption. So I'm saying this categorically speaking that he must be careful not to follow the path of my former president, President Muhammadu Buhari, who insisted on fighting corruption in Nigeria. But believe you me, throughout the 8 years in office, corruption dealt with him. And up to now, we have not survived the result of the corruption that dealt with the 8 years administration of President Muhammadu Buhari. So what is the way forward? There are two apparatus that the President of Senegal must embrace. He must, as a matter of urgency, bring about a revolution in Senegal, because agriculture is a tier 1 economy of Africa. He must, as a matter of urgency, revive that industry. Sustainability of food supply, for him to have sustainability of living standard of an average citizen of Senegal. Number 2 apparatus that he must embrace is what I call the technological innovation of the 21st century. For him to survive and be able to meet up with the demands of the young African in the continent and outside the continent, he must embrace and invest so much energy in the technology capacity of Senegal. Technology is the new order. Artificial intelligence is the new software. Without all of this, his government is not ready for serious business. The entire GDP of Africa is being capacitated by more than 60% of the youths contributing to the entire GDP of Africa. And for the GDP of Africa to become stronger and stronger more than ever before, technology is the new order in the democratic dispensation of Africa and the entire world. So the new president must embrace, as a matter of urgency, the infusion of more than 30% into the technological innovation of Senegal, so that an average youth in Senegal, an average child, will begin to develop their inherent capacity technologically for them to be able to meet up with the demand of the international markets, of the international economy. It is one thing to win an election. It is another thing to sustain the governance. And it's another thing to have the capacity to bring development, even development, into the GDP of Senegal. So these are my positive sentiment to the new president of Senegal.
Thank you immensely, Mr. OPEOLUWA. Just to reiterate, you are the Executive Director of Africa Bridge Initiative, joining us all the way from Nigeria. To proceed with you, Mr. MUSI, now you listen to your co-panelists, but in a bid not to focus on just the challenges, we are well aware that the new president might not have a solid political background like his mentor Ousmane Sonko, or better still like the other presidents that have ascended the throne in the West African country. With that in mind, what do you think are some of the solid or say strong points in favor of the new president?
First, he's a young person, he's a youth, and he has the capabilities of pushing Africa forward. He has the possibility of filling the will of Africans, the younger generation. He has the possibility of speaking to the young people and having them believe in what he says. He has the possibility of proving to the elderly ones that they are weighing and waving out, and they need to give space for a younger generation. These are issues that we don't need to argue about. So Faye has all the abilities to lead Africa, to lead Senegal, to lead the world into recognizing that Africa needs a stronger base. Having worked with Ousmane Sonko, and having lived and benefited from his largesse, his popularity, his political background, his political ideologies, and executing his leadership, I really say, I put it in quotes, I really fear that the president of Senegal might be Ousmane Sonko, in its real sense. In real sense, because that's Faye's mentor. And having been in jail and decided to push him as a vice to come up and take over power, having been in jail and on all his billboards and campaign gadgets and materials, we see both of them, it means that Senegal is being led and ruled by two young gentlemen. Yeah, I use young gentlemen because they are not up to their 50s. So I'm trying to be in a very comfortable position to say that in as much as I appreciate Faye's leadership, Faye's position, Faye's age, Faye's generational gap, Faye's generational ideologies to be the same like the ideologies of Sonko, I think they have all the possibilities in double facets to be able to push across the dream of African youths. So, in its rightful sense, I'm saying that both Faye or Sonko, whoever is the president of Senegal, in our local understanding, still has a better position of proving to the world that Senegal is not being influenced by the West. They are not being influenced by the West. So now, this is where I'm going to. There is a need for a regional bloc. An original bloc, in my rightful sense, will be interpreted to be a continental bloc. And if Faye needs to succeed in his mandate as the president of Senegal, he needs to believe in the ideologies of an African Union. He needs to believe in the perceptions of an African Union. Why do I say so? In its rightful sense, the African Union, just like the European Union, has similarities. And the African Union, where I see it as a Pan-Africanist, that they are failing is the fact that the African Union is trying to use its regional blocs like the ECOWAS, like CEMAC, like this the North African Democratic Community, to be able to be stronger. But I still think that pre-colonialism decided to segregate and partition Africa into regional blocs because they wanted Africa to be in blocs so that they can be controlled, they can be manipulated, as they partitioned Africa in 1888 to the principles of divide and rule. Faye, coming into power, thinks that he wants to bring back an already segregated nations into an existing structure or a regional bloc like the ECOWAS, which he emphasizes that he will use every other energy of his to bring back Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger into the ECOWAS. I fear that that is just another strategy to get into his Waterloo. Senegal has a very good democratic system, which we have known over the years. But like my co-panelist said, technology, the ideologies of the people, the military, the material forces, and all of these needs to emphasize and relent his energy into. I think Faye should be more committed in his domestic policies than looking at what already exists in other countries where their citizens are already supporting them. I want to backpedal a bit. Africa was divided in the rules and the minds of its pre-colonial masters because they wanted to have a grip on Africa and be able at any moment to destabilize ideologies, principles. Let me give you a simple example why I think if Faye wants to bring back Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger into the regional bloc, they will be failing. A simple example would be which he's emphasizing that he wants to bring back these Sahel countries back into the ECOWAS. Why did the ECOWAS, when Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali disassociated themselves from it, why did the ECOWAS not support their ideologies as member states of the African Union? I'm talking about Nigeria that had a stronger arm in the ECOWAS. Why did they not spend this energy that they had to propagate the ideologies not of the military leaders of these countries and looking at the strength that the population, the citizens of these countries had behind their leaders? Why did Nigeria and other African countries, why did they not support these governments through their people to be able to support the ideologies of segregation, staying as nations on their own, to implement principles that support the ideologies of their people, to be able to form a stronger African Union, which all of them are part of the African Union? Why? That's the question. But the issues at hand, which I think is something that we really need to look at, is the fact that if Faye wants to concentrate in bringing these people back into the African Union, it is a no-go area. It's a no-go area for me because I think this is not the rightful time for them to proceed in that area. So I'm hereby suggesting that Faye should concentrate at this moment. He should concentrate by trying to see that his citizens benefit the best from his political ideologies and make sure that he allows African Union to work with the powers of the citizens of African nations through their independent democracies than focusing on a democracy that was imposed on us by colonial masters and giving our governments and our leaders the power to stay in power for as many years as possible because they wanted to push forward the dreams, the perceptions, the benefits of these colonial masters. So I still think this is not the right time for Faye to look at national policies. There is a time that will come for these African countries that are breaking away from these regional blocks. There will be a time where they will decide to come back into those blocks without the will of others. But they will come in because they feel that Africa is more united, Africa is more stronger, and Africa has a more unilateral base where people can belong to these structures without the influence of pre-colonialism. So Faye, I still repeat, needs to stay within his local democratic principles to be able to push forward his agenda. Thank you.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Musiwa. Just note that you are Pan-Africanist. Before I proceed with you, Mr. OPEOLUWA, let's welcome this call from Mr. CD joining us all the way from Benin. You're welcome, sir.
Okay.
Could you proceed with your contribution?
For you, media, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, press and journalists. I want to name Madam NJIX, all my respect. I would like also to greet my distinguished greeting to all the thinking and well-made heads sitting on the stage. Mr. TAIWO, I can say, before any remarks, allow me once again to denounce the exclusive and chrysogenic electoral code adopted by the presidential movement in the Republic of Benin, and which will certainly be our problem in Benin country, because there are some who take Benin as their own property, and Benin is not the exclusive property of anyone, but of all the Beninese. people of Benin must know that it is after enormous struggles that we rest our sovereignty and not by slandering ourselves on social networks. You know, let us come back to the heart of the matters, madam. When we talk about the election in Senegal, the election in Senegal is let me say, a good thing, because when we talk about democracy, we have two kinds of democracy. Democracy in African democracy and the European or Occidental democracy. In Occidental democracy, only the minority lead the power. And in Africa, we perceive that democracy is what? Government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So it means that only Africans know what is democracy. What occurs in Senegal last time is a wonderful thing that a people create. Because, you know, what happens over there is a good thing. We can show everybody that only people can decide about the power. But I'm afraid, because the first floor that Diomaye Faye Bashir has taken last time is afraid, because he said that he want to bring back, Burkina Faso, Mali, and the Niger country to ECOWAS again. This is our own problems. When I have, this is curious and very bizarre remark that the new elected president of Senegal, who is ignoring for his first outing, I dare to believe that it was under the influence of uncontrolling joy at having freed himself from the yoke of Macky Sall and his allies, that he said what he said, and not what we always thought of them. How can you imagine a president elected, a Pan-African president elected, and who want to bring back another countries, Pan-African countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, to ECOWAS again? All of us here, we know that the AES countries, after several attempts to reason with an ECOWAS devoid of any logic and disrespectful not only of its own press, but above all, disrespectful of the Pan-African ideology of the founding father who created the ECOWAS. They have betrayed African, and now ECOWAS is with our enemies of Africa. No? So, and they wanted to attack Niger country because of nonsense things. So this is my worry. And here, I cannot know if it is a new ECOWAS that Abdel Bashir from Senegal is talking about, or if it is a ECOWAS that we know. Uncertainty reigns for the moment, but in any case, the rest of us have gone beyond the level of reflection which brings us back to sub-regional institution under order and in the service of NATO and the cures. What the new Senegalese president must know is that the people who elected him are waiting for him at the crossroad when he began by chasing Macky Sall, if he is not reflecting in his action. And no one has ever challenged serious Pan-Africanism and ended well in his country, or this continent, I mean. I would like to refresh his memory, by reminding him, of course, that thousands of Senegalese worldwide defied ECOWAS sanction and went to support Assimi Goïta, who left ECOWAS with the support of all Africans and the Pan-African galaxy first. So he should quickly regain control of things and know that what brought him to the Senegalese presidency, otherwise Macky Sall's fate risk being better than his wanting to bring back Africa into the fold of savage and humiliating imperialists, that would be the hate and the end of ends, because we are capable today of defying, of defying without any difficulty, even the shadow world military power, which is the process of packing in Agadez in Niger. So I will not take all the time. What we want them to know in Senegal, the new president, is to know that the election is for people, and he will work only for people, not for a system. And he has to bring back, he has to go to see Asmi Goita and Ibrahim Traore everywhere, and then we discuss about the future of our region. If not, he is lost. For you, television and all of the world, we will win this fight. Thank you, madam, and may God bless you. See you next time.
Thank you immensely, Mr. CD joined us all the way from Benin with that brilliant contribution. In a bit to proceed, now I'll give the floor to you, Mr. OPEOLUWA. You listened to the caller with his contribution with regards to today's topic of discussion, where we're evoking the recently ended presidential elections in Senegal. We are trying to focus on what awaits the new president. And now you listened to the caller. But then we have seen Senegal stood as a country of Africa's stable democracy under the outgoing president. Do you think that the new president is up to the task?
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for my brother all the way from BANEH. Of Africa, which you must understand. That is the politics of godfatherism. That is the politics of mentorship and a succession plan. And he said earlier on, he has a man who is just a few ahead of him in age and the rest. So he's not alone in the presidency. He's not alone. So because he's not alone, two things are or is dancing to the tune of the Senegalese. So those are the middle way he might find himself, or he will find himself. Because there's one thing about politics and governance. Politics and governance are twins. But most times, whenever a new president comes in or a new state governor comes in, they discover that their capacity in politics is not equivalent to their capacity in governance. So when we talk about governance, well, we cannot decide for now for the new president, Diomaye Faye of Senegal. But one thing I can assure you is that through the likes of mentors around him, he should be able to find his way in the governance and the economy of Senegal. And like I posited earlier on, you must understand that politics of the region is number one, and politics of a nation is another thing. But he must take seriously the politics of his nation as number one, because it takes a man with large capacity of personal finance for you to take over the public finance. So if he cannot handle the sovereignty of Senegal, there is no bother to delve into the sovereignty of the region, which is a very key for him to take into the presidency. You cannot assume that because you are one of the leaders in your own sub-region, then you have the capacity to take over the entire region. It's not as easy as we think. So he must first and foremost domesticate whatever policy he has for the entire region, for the entire sub-region. He must first and foremost domesticate it in his own nation, in terms of economy, in terms of sustainability, in terms of economic outlook, in terms of in terms of GDP, in terms of inflation, in terms of living standard of an average citizen of Senegal. These are very germane issues that is very critical that he must look at beyond any other sentiment. Because, for instance, you can see that Nigeria, we are the giant of Africa. But Like my co-panelist said, you are not saying, you can't see my president standing up every morning, fighting for West Africa or fighting for Africa. That is not his primary assignment. His primary assignment is Nigeria, to ensure that the economic capacity of Nigeria is sustainable in the next 8 years, in the next 10 years. Even though 4 countries are pulling out of ECOWAS, that must not stop the sovereignty of Nigeria. So even though 4 countries are pulling out of ECOWAS, that must not disturb the sovereignty of Senegal. And that is what we are telling Diomaye Faye, for him to realize that the sovereignty of Senegal is paramount to him and is paramount to every Senegalese. Because if the entire continent is safe and Senegal is not safe, then he himself is not or may not be safe in the next 5 years.
Thank you immensely, Mr. OPEOLUWA, too. We're gradually coming to the end of today's edition of Talking Points. Now over to you, Mr. Musiwa. You listened to the caller and you heard his own opinion with regards to this topic of discussion. Meanwhile, your co-panelist shares the same opinion as you on domesticating in-house policies for the growth and development of the nation. And now, do you see the new president living up to expectations?
I think the media first. The first thing is that the media is a form of governance also. We talking on Talking Point. It's a platform where leaders who are vicious would always want to refer to media platforms like this. So Talking Point is another arena where leaders in Africa must always stand to. The media has its role. I said earlier. And as long as the media has its role in governance, leaders within Africa, especially at this moment in time, must. People who love Africa, Pan-Africanists, are saying about Africa. And the goal for every African leader at this moment in time is to be able to put Africa first, make Africa his primordial interest. And this cannot be achieved because with plus 55 states in Africa, you cannot achieve this by trying to concentrate on the ideologies of other nations. You must be able to concentrate first, like our charity always begins at home. Faye must gain the interest and trust of his people coming into power. Those are his electorates. Like any democracy and governance, the people are the ones that vote the people into the Senate, into the parliament, and into government. Of a country, a municipality, a community, a meeting group, and as a father of the house, you must always depend on the ideas of the immediate people around you, which are your citizens. Faye has a responsibility in gaining trust at home and domestic rules, as the caller rightly said, before he can move out to external policies. When once he's not able to secure these interests of his people, he will be failing and missing on the goal of a young leader coming up with a lot of vibrancy. But I also think that he stands a better chance in achieving his goals and objectivities because he is just starting. He hasn't started implementing his policies. He is just saying, and if I have to get into the pool, by sitting by the side of the pool, dipping my legs into the pool and testing the waters. Like anyone who is about to drown in the seas, the person has to send his or her left leg, because your right leg might be more important to you. You send your left leg and test the waters. And if your left leg is chopped off, you should be able to gargle or dangle with your one leg. Faye should be using this strategy at this moment to test the waters. This should not be his primary objective, but I'm sure if he's been influenced by pre-colonialism, he should now use the feedback that Africans are saying or Pan-Africans are saying, to be able to redirect his ideologies and principles to fit the will of his people. Africa definitely will come someday and form the African Union. And we will form the African Union. It starts from all our little beginnings, because no one ever became an adult without passing through childhood. No one ever moved and extinct himself out of this life without passing through the different stages of life. Faye is at the beginning of a mandate where he hasn't started implementing, thanks to the fact that his policies are already being put out there. He has to re-strategize. He is a young and vibrant leader that I must tell you, he has the possibilities of emerging. He has the possibilities of succeeding. But if he believes and if he's been influenced by the principles and ideologies of our pre-colonial masters, he will fail sooner or later, because the same population that voted him is going to turn against him sooner or later. I can assure you here, I will come.
Are you with us, Mr. Prince Musiwa? Unfortunately, due to some connection disruptions. You're right on, sir.
Yeah. So I want to assure you that Faye needs to sit up and take the leadership of the Senegalese people to their interests. And at this moment, we are saying that let him desist from looking at the issues of Africa at his early mandate and look at the issues of the Senegalese people. All the other things will fit in place and Africa will be one and united. Thank you.
Exactly. The aim of all this is to have a united and, of course, prosperous continent. Now, with the last question, over to you, Mr. OPEOLUWA. Now, in your opinion, what is the way forward? In a bit to crown up today's debate, what is the way forward?
All right. Thank you. For the people of Senegal, for my new president, Diomaye Faye, I want to say a very big congratulations once again for being part of the new order, for being part of the paradigm new succession plan of the economic capacity of Africa, for being part of the new and the 21st century leadership with vigor, leadership with communal interest, leadership with communal development. And that is to say that for the new president, the going forward, you must understand that the yearnings of your people are your priority. The yearnings of your people are the first bus stop. The yearnings of your people brought into power, and their yearnings also can also take you out of power. No man is an island. You must understand that very quickly, immediately you assume position. No man is an island. And like my co-panelists have said, be careful of the politics of prebendalism, the politics of nepotism, the politics of divide and rule from the imperial masters, from the colonial masters. You must understand that going forward, Africa is the first, but your home is paramount to you. Senegalese must live an enjoyable life. Senegalese must begin to enjoy the dividends of democracy. Citizens, like the Saudi Arabians, like the Americans, the citizens of Senegal must be able to enjoy the dividends of democracy, like Chinese. They must be able to enjoy, like even the Israelis. That is what we are saying. That sustainability must be your first priority as a young and vibrant president-elect of the federal system of Senegalese. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. OPEOLUWA. Now to wrap up with you, Mr. Prince Musiwa. Now you listen to your co-panelists, but then you said if the president-elect has to succeed or through his tenure in power, he would have to focus first on his nation, then on the African continent. So what are your closing remarks?
My closing remark is that Africa needs to be more united. Africa needs, the people of Africa needs to support democracy. Democracy, I always say in quote because it's a presumption that was brought to Africa. the democracy in its rightful sense would have been the voice of the people, not the voice imposed on the people. So my closing remarks here is that Africans must desist from forming regional blocs and believing in ideologies of nations, ideologies of people, ideologies of citizens of nations, and what benefits a nation, what benefits its people, and to remember that Africa has its wonderful raw materials that the West is coming in at all time to extinct and export out of Africa. So we as Africans must support leaders that want to protect and defend the interests of these raw materials that it's so enshrined around the whole of Africa, so that together by converting and having good partnership deals with other foreign partners, we will be able, because a citizen will never, a country will never exist without partnership, will never exist without collaboration, will never exist without business opportunities with foreign bodies. But if Africa has to succeed, Africa must believe in a more united and stronger African Union where it's not believed and it doesn't belong to the principles and ideologies of an African bloc through ECOWAS, CIMAC, and SADC, but we must believe in the ideologies of the rights, the voice of the people of African nations to be able to pull Africa to where Africa is heading to. We must always desist from the fact that leaders in Africa must not stay in power for 10, 15, 20 years, but they must be able to come into power with ideas that benefit the interests of the people. So I'm in fact saying here that if Senegalese president is just taking over power, Mr. Diomaye Faye, I tell you, with the advice of your people, those pushing you behind, you must be able to look at the interests of your own people. African Union will become a stronger force where we don't depend on the power of the regional blocs, but we depend on the power of the people that come together to form the African Union. The Americans have plus 40-something states. These states are 48 different countries because they have electorates, they have government, they have governors that elect them. In Europe, we have plus 55 countries, plus 50-something countries. These countries in Europe also believe in the rights of the people of their different regions. But if you come to Africa, we have regional blocs and regional bodies like the ECOWAS, who have been formed, which are being formed by people, by pre-colonial masters with ideologies and principles that benefit them, not the interest of the people. So African nations will want to believe that with the 55 countries in Africa, we have to believe in the principle and ideologies of the people of Africa through their governments and rulers who want to believe in what they believe in. So I think that at this moment that we are giving you the opportunity to decide and make Africa better as a young leader. You have lived 44 years in your life. You have seen the differences. You have seen the errors of your predecessors. Live up to them as a young leader who have suffered, and let the generation that is coming ahead of you benefit from the mistakes of our leaders and our predecessors. I thank you, and I want to think that African Union should depend on the positivity of its people and not the positivities of regional blocs. Thank you.
Thank you immensely, Prince MUSI Wakeng. You are a Pan-Africanist. Thank you so much for your contribution on today's edition of Talking Point. We equally say thank you to you, Mr. OPEOLUWA TAIWO, who is the Executive Director of the Africa Bridge Initiative, who joined us all the way from Nigeria. We should equally acknowledge the contribution of Mr. CD, who joined us all the way from Benin. Ladies and gentlemen, our panelists say there is unity, or unity is strength, but then Africans will need to collaborate while they focus on their domestic